All right, so we just have a few more terms to go. The video cuts off after an hour, so just a few more. So we just ended with self-interest bias. So another type of bias that we need to look out for is social acceptability bias. And this is often the reason why a lot of people will do like anonymous surveys so that people can really be honest. And that's just because of, people's tendency or reluctance to give answers that they think that might not be socially acceptable or might not be something that people want to hear about. So we tend to not answer questions honestly when we think the truth might, make us look bad. So an example of this might be if I were to give you all a survey to ask you who in this class vapes on a regular basis. Okay, I would hope the answer would be not many or none of you, but I have a feeling that a lot of you who maybe do vape more than you should would not be honest with me because of the social acceptability bias, right? So you just have to be kind of aware of that with people. If you want to get accurate results, then you need to realize if there's some sort of social stigma on the questions you're asking. So we're going to do some projects later on in the semester, for instance, that ask you to get like statistics about people, like what are their eye colors and what is their heights. And one thing we're not going to ask people is what is their weight, because people tend to not want to be honest about questions like that. So it doesn't have to be necessarily something, illegal. It's just sometimes people don't want to be honest about certain types of topics. Another kind of bias to be aware of is the leading question bias. If you watch any, legal documentaries or anything like that, any legal dramas, you might know kind of what a leading question is from courts of law. But sometimes questions are worded in a way that kind of give the participant the idea of how the person wants them to answer. And then because we are almost all of us people pleasers at heart, sometimes we'll give an answer that maybe is not genuine just because we think that's what someone wants to hear. So let's go back to my vaping example. If I wanted to know if you vaped, okay, for instance, and let's just say you were going to be honest with me. So here are two questions I could ask you if you vaped. I could say, you vape, right? Okay, notice when I ask if you vape right, I'm almost like giving an inflection point at the word right, and it seems like I'm wanting you to say yes, right? Whereas if I say, you don't vape, do you? With some condescension in my voice, then it's pretty clear that what I want you to say is no, okay? When what I really should ask if I want a real answer to that question is just a straight up question, do you vape? How many times a week do you vape? And this is confidential and all that good stuff. All right, we've only got two more. So the second to last type of bias is a non-response bias. People often characterize this as the same thing as voluntary response, and it's not. It's basically, though, that people often refuse to respond. They don't want to. They don't have the time. You're bugging them. And if enough people kind of refuse to respond, then your sample size is too small, and it can affect results. So we're going to talk this semester about how big our sample size needs to be in certain scenarios. But, that might be like you sent out 2,000 surveys and only 20 people responded. Okay, 20 out of 2,000 is a very small percentage, right? So there's a big non-response bias. There's a lot of people deciding they're just not going to answer your survey. And then last but not least, this actually covers a lot of scenarios, is a sampling bias. Remember how we talked about when we're choosing a sample or a smaller subset of a big group, we want to make sure that those samples are randomly selected, where each person has, or not just each person, but each unit has the most, or has the same likelihood of being chosen. And so any type of sampling bias is when certain items are more likely to be chosen than others. Okay, so anytime you don't have a sample that is diverse and representative of the big group, then you have a sampling bias, and that's something we really, really want to strive to watch out for. So samples of convenience, the one that we mentioned earlier, where you just kind of, if you're taking the survey of people, you just kind of pull the people that are right around you just because it's, quote, convenient. But these are almost always going to have a sampling bias. So if I want to survey people on campus about something, I can't just ask people just in the math department where I'm working. Okay, I would have to get out there and actually get a diverse group of people, because otherwise I'm just getting responses from one kind of category of people, right? Maybe I want responses from some business majors and from some English majors. Maybe I don't just want people who are taking math classes. So that's kind of something to be on the lookout for. So there's a lot of terms we've talked about in this chapter. And so I really, again, want you to make sure that you pay attention to the homework and the quiz. So I'm not going to ask you to do a quiz or an in-class activity where I just give you a bunch of definitions and you have to jot down give you a bunch of terms and you have to tell me what the definitions are. But what I might do is ask you questions like, here's a scenario, what type of sampling is this? Or here's an experiment, what type of experiment is this? What type of bias might I be worried about in this scenario? Okay, so that's the kind of questions that you might see with these terms. So kind of think about that as you learn them.